Something that we need to focus on following the Minnesota Vikings 21-13 victory over the Indianapolis Colts was the Minnesota Vikings defense, because they've been struggling as of late. 31 points put up by the Detroit Lions, 30 points put up by the Los Angeles Rams. And Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford could practically do whatever they wanted during those course of the games. And this was a big bounce back game for them, because when you're facing off against Joe Flacco, you cannot let him torch you, or else we are in full collapse mode. And what was so scary about the Colts game was that the opening drive, the Colts were driving right down the field without any issues whatsoever. There was no resistance by the Minnesota Vikings defense on the first possession. And I'm sure every Minnesota Vikings fan was thinking the same thing. Here we go again. But fortunately for the Minnesota Vikings defense, Joe Flacco and Jonathan Taylor had an issue during a handoff, which the Minnesota Vikings defense played no part in. It's not like the defensive tackle blew the center back into Joe Flacco, or one of the linebackers got in and disrupted Jonathan Taylor. No, they just dropped the handoff. And the football does what the football does, and it squirts around, and it looked like Harrison Smith was going to jump on the football. Somehow Gruger Hill came away with the football. So that was a big break for the Vikings, because they go down and score, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an omen for the rest of the football game. Just think, 2017, 2018 Minnesota Vikings versus the Philadelphia Eagles, NFC Championship game. Case Keenum leads a Minnesota Viking touchdown drive right away. We're thinking Super Bowl. Vikings get the ball back, still up 7-0. We're going to the Super Bowl. They're going to lead another touchdown. Case Keenum throws a pick six. So it doesn't necessarily mean anything moving forward, but certainly not a good start if Joe Flacco is going to march the Colts right down the field and score a touchdown. However, they got lucky, and the Minnesota Vikings defense bounced back immediately following that drive. Just some statistics in this ballgame. Joe Flacco, 16 for 27, 100, and I'll share the screen with my YouTube watchers. 179 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 pick, 3 sacks for 20 yards, which was a massive improvement over the game against the Los Angeles Rams, because remember, the Rams had 3 offensive linemen injured in that game, and they specifically did things to avoid taking sacks, like getting rid of the ball early, quick screens, things like that, so that Matthew Stafford didn't take sacks. But they didn't do that the entire game. The Minnesota Vikings pass rush was non-existent, and Matthew Stafford had all day to throw. So the fact that they got 3 sacks on Joe Flacco was a good sign. QBR 14.6, passer rating of 63.7. Jonathan Taylor, the horse that makes the Colts offense goes, 13 carries for 48 yards. Their best receivers, Alec Pierce, 3 catches, 41 yards. Michael Pittman, 1 catch, 14 yards. So the Colts offense really didn't do anything for them in this game. And you got to credit the Minnesota Vikings defense for making it tough on them. And then there were some fun statistics that people are posting to X, and I'll just share those with you as well, just because it gives good context on how the Minnesota Vikings defense played. The Colts average minus 0.35 EPA per play on offense tonight. Their worst mark of the season. Now, I don't honestly know what EPA per play means. EPA. I'm not sure what that means. However, I do know that it's a good thing that the Minnesota Vikings were doing if the Colts offense has minus 0.35 EPA per play. And it's fascinating that it is minus 0.35 EPA per play because of what they did on that first drive. They were marched right down the field. So for it to turn that badly after a good opening drive just shows how dominant the Minnesota Vikings defense was in this ballgame. And then here's another stat. Colts didn't take one single snap in the red zone tonight. So it just shows that the Minnesota Vikings defense crushed them, and the Colts could not move the football down the field. Something I also wanted to address was the two stinkers the Vikings defense had against the Detroit Lions and Los Angeles Rams. Because when you play 17 games, you are allowed stinkers. And I have some examples of teams that have historical defenses having stinkers. And it happens. You're not going to be lights out every single week of the season. So I'm just going to defend the Minnesota Vikings defense a little bit here and tell you that stinkers during the course of a 17-game season with offensive coordinators / head coaches / play callers like Sean McVay and Ben Johnson, two of the brightest minds in the NFL, you're allowed to have stinkers against those kinds of teams. So I'm just going to show you the 1985 Bears. Okay, historical team. Week 1, they did give up 28 points against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But look at that. So win. 0 points, 3 points, 0 points, 10 points, 9 points, 7 points, 10 points, 19 points. All these points given up by the Bears defense. Just an annihilation. I mean, they gave up 28 in week 1, 24 in week 3, but their offense put up enough points to win. But then they had a big stinker. And the fourth to final week of the season, they gave up 36 points to the Miami Dolphins. I'm guessing that's Dan Marino, I would assume. So even the greatest defense of all time had a stinker and gave up a lot of points to the Miami Dolphins on December 2nd of 1985. So it happens, okay? Another example, the Baltimore Ravens 2001 defense. This is the year Trent Dilfer won the Super Bowl as the Ravens quarterback. Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, all those boys. Let's take a look at their season because this is another historical defense. They gave up 27 points to the Cleveland Browns, November 18th. They gave up 31 points to the Green Bay Packers, October 14th. They gave up 24 points to the Browns on October 21st. That's not terrible. So a couple of games where they weren't as amazing as you would think that the Baltimore Ravens defense would be. You know, they gave up 6 points to the Bears, 7 points to the Titans, 10 points to the Steelers, 10 points to the Titans, 21 points to the Jaguars, 0 points to the Bengals. So, wow, bless me. Thank you very much. So my point being is that even though the Minnesota Vikings defense struggled in 2 straight games after being lights out, sensational, forcing C.J. Stroud, Brock Purdy, Daniel Jones, Aaron Rodgers, those guys struggled and couldn't do anything against the Vikings defense. My point being is that you're allowed stinkers, and stinkers happen to the greatest defenses of all time. So the big arching point is that the Minnesota Vikings need the defense to carry them to however far they're going to go. Because the last thing that we want is Sam Darnold getting into a shootout with a Matthew Stafford, with a Jared Goff in the playoffs. Because who's ultimately going to win that matchup? Most likely. The odds would point towards a Jared Goff or Matthew Stafford because eventually Sam Darnold isn't going to continue that trend of being lights out throughout that football game. The Vikings are going to rely on their defense if they are going to win playoff games. So the fact that they got back on track, I know it's the Colts, I know it's Joe Flacco, but the fact that they got back on track is a good sign. And the fact that they had 2 stinkers isn't necessarily as bad a sign as we think, because the examples I used, it happens to every single football team, even the greatest defenses of all time. So, thank you for watching this episode, and I hope this case made your day brighter.